In a shocking case out of the UK, 10 men were convicted of grooming, abusing, and raping underage girls over a 2-year period, and the crimes were horrifying. But what happened after sentencing is what really caught our attention, because one of the ringleaders, originally sentenced to 15 years, had his prison time increased by another court. In the US, that would be nearly unthinkable. So the question is, how and why did this happen? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. In the United States, it is almost unheard of for a criminal defendant's sentence to be increased after they are officially sentenced for a criminal conviction. There's double jeopardy concerns, there's due process concerns. It's not always. I mean, there can be clerical errors with a sentence. Maybe someone violates the terms of, let's say, probation, and then they get it with prison time. There could be a retrial, and the person gets convicted of maybe even more serious crimes and is hit with a higher sentence. There is even a law where a prosecutor can, in fact, appeal a sentence saying the judge didn't follow the sentencing range. But I mean, this is rare stuff, okay? It's quite exceptional circumstances. You don't see it too often. And that is why we want to talk about what just happened in the UK. And I got to say, in this story I'm about to describe, you might say, makes sense, because we go to England, more specifically the town of Blackrod in Bolton. And according to Greater Manchester Police, 10 men engaged in the grooming, rape, and sexual abuse of young girls over a 2-year period from 2016 to 2018. They would target these girls between the ages of 13 and 15 by meeting them at a local community center where they hang out. And then they proceeded to talk to them on messaging and social media platforms to escalate the activity. Here are the men. We have Ashley Darbyshire, Harvey Aspden, Corey Barrett, Daniel Flatters, Jack Polson, James Fitzgerald, Elliot Turner, Ross Corley, Brandon Harwood, Richard Haslam. Each man faced a series of different charges. We're talking a range, for example, of rape of a female under the age of 16, sexual activity with a female under 16, sexual assault of a female under the age of 16, sexual communication with a female under the age of 16. And to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about, during a sentencing hearing at Liverpool Crown Court on April 29th of this year, this is what one of the survivors had to say during an emotional victim impact statement. Quote, "This is the story of how these individuals destroyed my life forever. I think nothing can hurt me as bad as what they did to me, but I'm still terrified of everything and everyone around me. I can't even go outside on my own. I suffered every form of abuse from each of these individuals, and they continue to haunt me every day. What they don't realize is it's not okay to take someone's life just to get a quick fix. I'd rather be dead most days than deal with all this mental torture and memories. Because of these men, I will never be able to live a normal life again. I'm too scared just to do simple tasks such as going outside or holding down a job, even simply being naked. I am forced by my own brain to relive every second with these vile people over and over again. No amount of prison time for them can make that go away. I live in my own prison now, and that is what they have done to me." Wow. Now, I mentioned sentencing, right? So Polson was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Haslam was sentenced to 16 years. Flatters, 7 years. Fitzgerald, 5 years and 6 months. Barrett, 12 years. Turner, 2 years. Aspden, 15 months suspended for 2 years. Corley, 28 months. And Harwood, 10 years. But now we got to talk about the ringleader, the primary offender, according to authorities, 28-year-old Ashley Darbyshire. He was sentenced to 15 years after he pleaded guilty to 19 charges. So 3 counts of rape, 12 counts of sexual activity with a child, 3 counts of inciting a child to engage in sexual activity, and 1 count of taking indecent photographs. And this involved 5 girls between 2016 and 2018. And here is how the police described what Darbyshire did. That he, quote, met the primary victim in 2016 when he was 19 and she was 13 and began messaging her online. He introduced her to 9 of his friends, and they all used and abused her for their own sexual gratification into 2018. They would display violence and aggression as they fought with each other, and through their interactions, all of which were intimidating to a young teenage girl. They treated her as though she was worthless until she finally believed it herself. It's pretty disgusting, to say the least. Judge Simon Medlin said that the girl testified with strength and courage, and this was in stark contrast to the, quote, dishonest and fanciful evidence that the defendants provided during the course of this case. And he even said Darbyshire failed to show, quote, any hint of warmth or affection towards this girl that authorities say he was infatuated with, and said that Darbyshire had a crazy attitude to sex and that he treated this young girl as a, quote, human sexual commodity. The survivor said in court, Ashley destroyed me in every way he possibly could. He took everything I had from me, and when I was a child, all I had was myself and my body. I thought I loved him at first, but it very quickly turned to fear. He knew exactly how to work me and what to say to make me do anything he wanted. He had a hold over me, and to this day, I question why. So why am I focusing so much on Mr. Darbyshire especially? Well, as I mentioned, something happened. So Darbyshire's sentence was increased by the Court of Appeal. This 3-judge panel upped his prison time to 18 and a half years. Again, relatively unheard of here in the United States, so that's why we wanted to get an expert on this to talk about how this happens, why, break down the other aspects of this case too. Let me bring on back here on Sidebar, Nick Brett, who is a criminal litigation attorney out in the UK. Nick, thank you so much for taking the time. It's good to see you again. So what is the process to have a sentence increased, and why did the court do it?
Well, it was introduced actually in the 1988 Criminal Justice Act that the Attorney General, who is the government-appointed person in charge of legal affairs, had the right to go back to the Court of Appeal to refer a sentence as unduly lenient. And what that means is that the Attorney General makes an application to the Court of Appeal in the first instance for permission. So for their permission to hear the case, and if they grant permission, and then they will then hear the case and decide whether or not to impose a new sentence. And so whether or not they agree that the sentence imposed by the judge was effectively inappropriate and unduly lenient. In 2024, the scheme was slightly widened to the extent that it now allows for affected parties, so usually victims or victims' families, to canvass the Attorney General, the Crown Prosecution Service, who's the state body in charge of prosecuting, and to put forward their petition, if you like, that such a sentence is unduly lenient, and for the Attorney General's consideration.
Okay, real quick, if you're in a business of some kind, gotta tell you this. Big shout out to Odoo for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. Odoo is an incredible all-in-one business management software that provides a range of accounting, manufacturing, and sales applications. To grow a successful business, it's important to stay focused on the creative vision, that's what matters, and not get bogged down by things like invoicing and balancing the books. That's where Odoo comes in. They are a one-stop shop game changer that gives users a clean, modern dashboard designed to provide all of your business needs. Take Odoo's accounting tool, okay? It utilizes smart AI to check bank balances, cash flow, vendor bills, invoices, all in one place. Maybe you need help with manufacturing. Odoo's apps can actually sync your inventory to purchases and keep everything running smoothly in just a few clicks. From the assembly line to the sale, Odoo's easy-to-use software helps you manage it all. And right now, you can get a free 15-day trial of Odoo's all-in-one business solution to give your business the cutting edge. Check it out at odoo.com/takeover. And what was the rationale for this panel to say Darbyshire deserved more prison time than he originally got?
Well, I think there's probably a number of factors here. First of all, the seriousness of the offending. So you're talking about an adult male raping 2 different victims, both of whom were barely 13 years old, and engaging in all sorts of other, deplorable sexual activity with these girls without consent. Then there are various other aggravating features. So you mentioned earlier on the grooming aspect of it. So the fact that he invited these girls to come and meet him and his friends. Most of these offences were committed at a particular address where these girls were also plied with narcotic drugs. Such as cocaine, and the offending took place over a long period of time. And I think with Derbyshire, part of the complaint of the Attorney General was that the judge had not properly recognised the magnanimity of his offending as compared to that of others. And in fact, in the initial sentencing process, he received a year less than one of the other defendants. So I think parity in terms of the seriousness of his culpabilities, him being the ringleader, was a fundamental factor behind the decision to increase the sentence by 3.5 years.
Yeah, and to provide a little more context on this, so Lord Justice Edis, who apparently sat with Justice Butcher and Judge Angela Morris, said that Darbyshire was significantly more culpable than anyone else in this case, having committed 19 offenses against 5 victims. He is a predatory sexual offender who targets child victims, albeit ones who are not under the age of 13. The fact that they were only just past their 13th birthday is, in his case, a highly material factor. The persistent and entrenched nature of his behavior in targeting not just one 13 to 14-year-old child, but 5 is also a highly material factor. Now, Nick, is changing a sentence like this common? Because if it is, it does make you wonder what is going on at the lower court. Perhaps the sentences are too lenient. Is there an issue going on, or is this a rarity for a rare kind of case?
I wouldn't say it's common. First of all, there are limitations on the power. And so a sentence can only be referred as unduly lenient for particular kinds of serious offences. And so it has to be what are called indictable-only offences. So those are offences which can be tried only on indictment, one of which is rape. So that means that such an offence couldn't be tried in a lower court, a magistrate's court. And so there is a limitation, if you like, on the types of sentences for the types of offences for which this power can be exercised. Albeit that I do think that it is a power that's used more and more. I do think that we are seeing fairly frequent examples of the Court of Appeal interfering with sentences in this way. And probably one comes across such decisions 2 or 3 times in a month, I would say, on average. And I do think that the frequency of the exercise of this power is increasing.
What are the arguments against doing this? Do they say it's a violation of their rights in some way?
Well, I mean, predominantly the argument is that the sentence is within the appropriate range, and I should say that there are applications of this nature that are refused.
And that's actually what happened here. The court actually rejected the application to increase the sentences of the other defendants. Why?
That's exactly correct. That's exactly right, Jesse. So I think that the predominant concern of the Court of Appeal in this case was that Derbyshire's sentence didn't reflect his culpability when set in the context of the others, and so that's why they decided not to interfere with the other sentences, which they considered to be within the appropriate range.
By the way, the men received sexual harm prevention orders and restraining orders for life. Can you elaborate what exactly those are, what those look like?
The sexual harm prevention order is an order which requires the offender usually to refrain from certain types of activity that are linked to offending. So, for example, relatively commonly, offenders that have their internet access restricted, for example, are required to present devices to the police on demand for inspection, can sometimes be required in conjunction with other requirements to notify a change of address where they're living, if they intend to leave the country for a particular period of time. So there are restrictions on liberty, some of which are subject to challenge, as you might imagine, based on sort of more general human rights considerations about privacy in particular.
And the restraining order is that they have no contact, I imagine, with the
A
victims in this case.
restraining order, I mean, a restraining order is a little bit like an injunction. So it is an order usually preventing a particular individual from having contact with another individual or another group of individuals, preventing them from contacting them directly or indirectly, stopping them from going within particular exclusion zones, usually around the victim's home, and sometimes can have other slightly more wide-ranging provisions too.
And they're also hit with the sex offender registration for life. Is that something that's easily available to the public to see who's living in their community, where these people are? Is that something citizens look at? Are there services that are
It is
provided to check that?
It is available on request, and the information can be provided under Freedom of Information requests as to the location of particular sex offenders in an area. I mean, as you might imagine, that kind of thing is quite controversial because what the police are keen to do is to avoid people who've served their sentences, for example, being hounded out of particular areas, sometimes the creation of civil unrest when perhaps information about I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about this particular case, but another case, information about an offender or his offences has been exaggerated or blown out of proportion. And sometimes that can lead to civil unrest. So there are concerns about the provision of that kind of information.
And how does this work? Because I saw a number of their sentences. It says they will serve two-thirds of the sentence or at least half of the sentence. Is that parole, and how does that work?
Yeah, so the starting point with any sentence in the UK is that you serve half of that sentence in custody, and the remaining half on license, meaning that you are subject to recall if you commit any further offence, or you don't comply with any conditions that are imposed on a license. But there are all sorts of mechanisms which allow a court to extend the period of time spent in custody to say two-thirds. And in a case like this, the sentence in custody for Derbyshire, for example, would almost certainly be two-thirds of his sentence in custody. Sometimes they can extend licence periods too, so they can extend beyond the whole period of the term of imprisonment if it's considered by a judge that an offender, for example, is particularly dangerous.
By the way, talking about danger, so these are heinous crimes. You have multiple men between ages 17 and 29 at the time. They target all these young girls, apparently gave them drugs, alcohol, exchanged sexual communications with them, sent pictures of their private parts to the minors. We're talking about the abuse. And by the way, a lot of this abuse happened at a house that the judge called, quote, a lawless den of iniquity and a filthy hovel. You come to find out that the house apparently belonged to a drug user who lived with his father. It was filled with holes, destroyed light bulbs, urine stains. And I wonder, Nick, is this an outlier? I mean, is this case just so out there that people are talking about it? Or unfortunately, do you see the abuse of young girls like this? I mean, how often does this happen for a period of time where it goes undetected, a 2-year period? It's so egregious that it's so concerning. Where does this case stack up in terms of other ones you've seen?
Well, I think, to every right-minded person, it's very, very difficult to imagine that this kind of thing does go on a lot. And I think that, this kind of case is newsworthy because it is so shocking. And, I can't say that it's an isolated case. I think that we have had a number of stories, particularly over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, where gangs of individuals have got together for the purposes of grooming and exploiting young girls for sex. And often what goes with that is the use of drugs, alcohol, blackmail, and other ways of getting them to bend to the offender's will. It's difficult to say how common it is, but certainly cases of this nature, I suppose, feature, more than twice or three times in a year.
It's disgusting. By the way, we didn't even talk about how they got caught. So Nick, apparently June 2018, one of the defendants took one of the victims in a car. She was 15 years old. He's drunk, ends up crashing the car into parked vehicles. The girl suffers a cut to her eye, goes to school. Her friends at school are worried about her. Teachers get involved. She ends up admitting what happened. Other victims start speaking up. Police are brought in and the investigation starts. Can't make anything like that up, Nick.
No, I completely agree. It's I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you wonder how these kinds of situations subsist for so long.
Because they don't speak, because
without,
unfortunately there's situations where the young victims may not speak up, and it takes something like this for it to happen.
It's terrible.
Yeah, and that's a problem. That's a problem, but it's completely understandable because they are being abused at such a young age. It's confusing, it's scary, it's traumatic, and it's one of the reasons we talk about why there maybe needs to be laws to give them some sort of legal outlet, that there's no more statute of limitations, whether it's here in the United States, there's certain states that are putting forward laws where you can file a lawsuit against your abuser years after, maybe not a criminal case, but a civil case, at least, to get some sort of accountability.
We don't have a statute of limitations here in the UK for criminal investigations, and quite often, allegations of child abuse are prosecuted now more than 30 or 40 years after the event.
Well, the counter argument to that would be: is that fair? Is that fair? You're having somebody accuse somebody of sexual assault or abuse. Memories fade. Evidence fades. Is that fair? I mean, there is an argument that there is a statute of limitations.
Look, I mean, there are concerns, obviously, about evidence fading with time. But I mean, you probably heard about the scandal involving Jimmy Savile over here in the UK, who was a very prominent broadcaster for many, many years, who subsequently was discovered after his death, was involved in very, very serious sexual assault of minors involving others. And there was a very wide-ranging inquiry undertaken following his death when all this came out, and there were a number of prosecutions that followed. And we're talking about prosecutions particularly actually focused up in the northeast in Scarborough, which took place for conduct in children's homes, for example, in the late 1970s. And my personal experience of dealing with those kinds of cases was such that actually the quality of the evidence can be quite compelling. When you have somebody giving evidence, if they're in their 50s, about a terrible thing that happened to them when they were a small child, they can recall it quite clearly, often and often in quite a compelling way, such that convictions follow.
I'm going to end on this point. So Detective Constable Robert Booth, who worked on the investigation, worked with the victims, said at the time of the original sentencing, quote, "I hope these sentences offer some kind of comfort and a sense of justice for our brave victims as they try to move on with their lives. It was thanks to their bravery in coming forward that these men now have to pay for their despicable crimes against young, vulnerable, and impressionable girls. We could not have got to this point without your incredible bravery. It must have been incredibly difficult for them to sit through interviews and to have to relive the traumatic experiences they had. This has been a lengthy and arduous process for you all, and we thank you for your courage. I am glad these depraved individuals have been brought to justice, and I hope this sends a clear message that we will not tolerate sexual predators on our streets. If you are a victim of sexual abuse, please reach out to us. We are here to listen and work with you at your own pace when you are ready." Nick Brett, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.